Hey everyone, Steve from Backcountry Gallery here. This time around, I want to talk about the new Nikon Z6 and Z7 mirrorless cameras. I've had a ton of emails and questions coming in from all over. People asking, hey Steve, should I ditch my D850, my D500 and get these instead? Are these way better than the DSLRs? What should I do? I have a lot of information for you. I want to kind of pass on a lot of my thoughts based on the specifications and stuff. But before we get to that, I want to tell you that this style of video is going to be a little bit different. You're used to a certain look and feel of the videos from me. This is going to be more of a presentation style. The thing is, I've been really busy, and I've been doing things like working on that exposure book, and we've been getting ready to go on our Costa Rica trip next month. We have 3 sessions we're going down in September. And if you would like to join us for next year, because I've had a lot of people on YouTube asking about workshops. If you'd like to join us for next year, head over to my website. In the last just under 2 weeks or so, we've sold out 62 of our 70 spots. So there's only 8 spots left, but maybe there's still time for you to get in on this. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, with the Nikon Z6 and Z7, what I'm going to do here is not going to be a technical review. There's a million of those out there. You can go to Nikon's website and see the spec sheet. There's brochures. There's all that information. You don't need it from me. What we're going to do here is talk about my take on this as a wildlife photographer. Now, this is not my take as a landscape photographer or as a macro photographer or as a street photographer or any of that. This is as a wildlife photographer because that's what I do. So I want you to keep that in mind as we're discussing these aspects of the camera. So let's go ahead and we'll get started. The first thing I want to talk about is the 5-axis in-body image stabilization. This is one of the features I'm kind of intrigued with. I don't know how well it's going to work, but this is one of the things I'm actually excited about. It's neat that we could take older lenses and kind of bless them with VR, if you want to say it that way. So whether it's very effective or not, I don't know. I've heard mixed things about this, so we'll find out as time goes on. But that's one of the things I'm kind of excited about. Maybe. We'll see how that goes. The other thing I'm excited about is an EVF Viewfinder. Now, I realize all mirrorless cameras have these, but as a DSLR shooter, the ability to, look through this beautiful viewfinder and, be able to adjust menus and look at exposure, basically what I see is what I get in the viewfinder, that's like super cool to me. So I really like that. I especially like that you can do focus peaking in the viewfinder. And my understanding from pretty much everything I've seen is that this EVF on this Nikon is really good. So very excited to see that. Next, another thing I like is a little flip screen. I'm glad to see they have it. I wish they would have done an articulating screen instead. I do find these very useful though. The next thing I like about this camera is the adapter. I like that you can take any Nikon autofocus lens as a motor built into it, basically, like an AFS lens, for instance. Hook it on here and have full capability. Nikon claims there is no reduction in autofocus speed or anything like that, so this is pretty exciting. That was one of the things I was really worried about with this mirrorless camera, is if there was going to be a hit on your existing lenses when you use the adapter. Nikon says there's not, so I'm very excited about that. Next, we have durability. I was glad to see that Nikon has weather sealed this camera and dust proofed it at the same level as the D850. Stuff like that makes a big difference. I've heard a lot of mixed things about some of the Sony products out there as far as the weather sealing and how they tend to fail a lot easier than the Nikons do, and you might be hesitant to take them into a harsh environment. This one sounds like it's good to go for that. So kudos to Nikon on that one. Next, we have size, weight, and layout. Now, for a lot of people, the big draw with mirrorless is that it's really lightweight. And if I was doing landscapes and stuff, sure, I would love to have a lightweight camera and some lightweight lenses to take, miles into the backcountry. But as a wildlife photographer, this isn't a big deal. A lot of times the lenses I'm using are pretty heavy anyway, so a little bit of extra weight on the camera side doesn't bother me too much. But I can totally see like putting a 300 PF or that new 500 PF on this camera and going on a hike or something like at Circle B Bar Reserve down in Florida or along the beaches down there for birds and, having a real compact, lightweight, easily hand-holdable setup. So I do see it from that perspective. But on the other side of it, I also like to use the big guns like my 600 f4, and I know that this is not going to balance on my gimbal head with the 600 f4. I can't get the D850 to balance on that gimbal head with that front heavy 600 f4. So there's no way that this is going to do it either. I'm going to have to add some weight to it. So it's kind of a give and take here. The single card slot has caused a lot of people to be very upset with this camera. As a wildlife photographer, though, you're going to find this maybe a little bit of a surprise, but I don't care. I've never had a deer or a bear sue me for not being able to produce the photos that I was taking. So if I have a card failure, I'm usually out of day's shoot is what would happen. In all the years I've shot, I've had like 2 card failures, and both of them, in both instances, I didn't lose any photos. So I'm not like freaking out about having just a single card slot. I'll pop a big card in there. It's fine. Now, on the flip side of that, though, I'm going to step out of wildlife photography for a minute. When I used to shoot weddings, I did it with film. But if you're doing modern weddings, if I was shooting weddings nowadays and I was using digital, there's no freaking way I would do it with one card. Sorry. As a pro body, I don't think this cuts it. So let's go ahead and move on. The silent shutter, that's something I'm kind of looking forward to with mirrorless, just because there are times that it does scare the animals off, but for the most part, it's not been an issue for me. Probably 99% of the time, it doesn't seem like the shutter makes any difference to these animals that I'm photographing anyway. Every now and then you'll get a shy bird or something that'll fly away when it hears it, but honestly, it has not been a big deal, but it would be nice to be able to flip to a silent shutter mode and use it that way. One word of caution, though, is that readout is limited to 1/15th of a second. That means even if you have your shutter speed set at 8,000th of a second, the camera will expose at that shutter speed, but it'll take a 15th of a second to read that entire sensor. And when that happens, you could get skewing and rolling shutter and, that type of phenomena. So just kind of keep that in mind, that electronic shutter is not going to be suitable for really high speed action of any sort, but it can come in handy sometimes. Let's talk about AF coverage a little bit here. I love the fact that we have 90% coverage inside this viewfinder. One of the big problems I have with my FX viewfinders is when I'm out there photographing wildlife and I have the eye and it's just above where the AF area is in the composition. So I have to focus and recompose, and if the animal's looking around or he's moving, then I'm constantly focusing, recomposing, and I'm missing shots. With something like this, you can put the AF point right on the eye and keep it there. I love that. The entire area is available with the F-mount glass if you're using the adapter. That's very cool. I was a little bit worried about that. It uses hybrid on-sensor phase detection autofocus, which is pretty cool. Basically, it's using phase detect to get it in there, and it's also using contrast detect to help. And the great thing about focusing on the sensor, by the way, is that all of those problems with autofocus fine-tuning, they go away. You don't have to worry about it with this. It's on the sensor, so there's no calibration required between a separate unit. So that's very cool. However, that's kind of where the cool stuff ends with the autofocus. The AF areas are a little bit of a concern to me. Some are similar to what we have with live view. We have pinpoint, single point, wide, and we have the large wide and the small wide. And we also have some new areas, an auto area AF with face detection. We haven't really had something exactly like that before. We've had face detection, but not quite like this. And it has a new dynamic mode, like Dynamic 9, I guess, is what it's similar to in your current Nikons. Probably, I think on like a D850, it probably is more like a D25. Just kind of put it in perspective. It's not a very large area. Let's put it that way. So this maybe brings me to some issues. So there's no group AF at all. Now possibly the wide area is replaced, but we don't know. That's the problem with this AF system. We just don't know enough about it. We don't know how it performs. We don't know what modes really do what the way Nikon has it set up at this point. But right now, there's no group AF, and that was kind of a staple for a lot of us when we're out there shooting birds in flight. There's no larger or expanded dynamic AF areas. So if you're used to using a bunch of these larger areas like, D72 on my D810 or D153, D25, D9, there's 4 of them on the D850, and there's exactly one of them that's kind of just a medium-sized, smallish one on this one, and you don't have the options there. So that's a little bit concerning too. Now the other thing of concern is that 3D AF is gone. It's been replaced with some kind of awkward tracking mode. Now, if you've read my stuff and you know what I do, I'm not really a huge fan of 3D AF for wildlife photography, but, in this case, and I realize some people use it, and the problem is what they've implemented here is really, really screwy. Basically, if you're using the electronic viewfinder, or even the back's done a little bit differently, but it's the same concept. When you're shooting this stuff, you're looking through the viewfinder, and you see something you want to track, you have to reach down with your thumb, I guess, and press that OK button, and then get the AF point on the subject, give a half press on the shutter release, follow it with your focus, and then when you're done tracking, you need to press the OK button again. I mean, that's kind of nightmarish when you think about all the steps you have to take there. You're going to miss shots. Just imagine shooting like multiple birds in a flock and you're trying to go from one to the other. Every time you want to switch a bird, you're going down and hitting that OK button. It doesn't make any sense to me. That's very, very awkward, and you're definitely going to miss shots with it. There's no getting around that. More AF issues. It seems like the AF system may not be ready for real action scenarios at this point, or real active scenarios as far as that goes, like what we typically have with wildlife. If you notice when you look through their brochures, there's very few wildlife or action shots showcased in the brochures and the marketing material for this camera, and I think that's very telling. The only thing I saw was some running horses in the brochure, and that was about it. I mean, I didn't see the typical stuff you would see with, with a release. I don't think that's an oversight. I just don't think the camera might be capable of it, at least not currently. I've looked at a lot of hands-on tests from people who've had the camera in their hands, places like Dpreview, for instance, and I haven't seen anything that was like, oh my gosh, this is the best autofocus system ever. I've seen a lot of excuses. I've seen a lot of, this is pre-production firmware, that type of stuff. So we don't know whether or not this is going to be if it's going to get better. But, nobody is praising the AF system at this point. I want to be very clear about that. No one that I've seen anyhow is praising the AF system. In fact, it seems like it's failing at very simple stuff when you're out there looking. One thing I want you to look at when you're done watching my video here is to go to Dpreview. I'll put the link down in the description area on YouTube here. And there's a test, I think on page 5 of their Z7 review, their Z6, Z7 preview, or whatever they're calling it, where they had a pre-production camera and they have a guy running towards the camera. They took 16 photos, and you can kind of mouse over each number there and it'll switch photos for you. I don't want to put it here because it's probably a copyright infringement, so you'll have to see it on your own. But in my opinion, not one of those is acceptably sharp. I'm sorry, just not. If I was shooting that with, one of my Nikons, I'd be very disappointed. One of my DSLRs, I'd be very disappointed if that was the result I was seeing. So I am very concerned about it. Now, they make a big note that, this is pre-production. This is not the finalized firmware. And I understand that, but by the same token, I don't think that was taken months ago. I think that was done very recently. And the thing is, Nikon's got to ship these cameras here in a month. The Z7 comes out at the end of September. So, they don't have a lot of time to, fix major problems like it doesn't autofocus right. So I'm very skeptical about the AF system. I'm hoping I'm completely wrong on that, and that when it comes out, everyone's like, oh my gosh, this is the best AF system ever in a mirrorless camera. That's what I'm hoping for. But at this point, based on the information I have at this time, it doesn't look like it's going to go that way. So I just want to be straight with you guys. Next, I want to talk about frame rate, because that's kind of the next little problem area for me. The top frame rates seem kind of like marketing hype. For top speeds, they are listed the Z6 at 12 frames per second and the Z7 at 9 frames per second. But in order to do that, you have to be in 12-bit RAW. You can't shoot that in 14-bit like you can with, other Nikon cameras. In 14-bit RAW, you only get 9 frames per second on the Z6 and 8 frames per second on the Z7. In addition, there's no auto exposure over 5.5 frames per second. So here's what that means. That means if you were shooting maybe a deer, he's running across a field and there's mixed light, there's sunlight and there's shadow and you're following him. Normally with a DSLR, the camera would simply adjust the exposure if you were in an auto exposure mode to compensate for the difference in brightness there. With this camera, whatever it starts off with for an auto exposure, that's where it's going to stay. Now, I don't see this being a huge problem all the time, but it's definitely something that's going to creep in there and cause some difficulty for some people. The other thing is no live view updates over 5.5 frames a second. Now, that's a little bit concerning too, because if you're tracking something, it's kind of nice to be able to see what's happening in the viewfinder. And my understanding is that you just don't have that live feed anymore in there. So basically, what it sounds like to me, it's like having a high-powered sports car, and every time you hit the throttle all the way down, all you can see is what's in the rearview mirror. So it'd be very hard to track animals like that. So that in essence, basically what I'm going to tell you here is that don't look at these as 9 and 12 frames per second cameras. Look at them at their realistic speed, where you have auto exposure being adjusted, where you have a live view feed. You absolutely have that. It doesn't make any sense to have a high-speed camera where you're not getting a live feed of what you're shooting. I'm sorry, that doesn't make any sense to me. So in reality, these are 5.5 frame per second cameras. I think they have to be looked at like that from a practical usability standpoint. So keep that in mind. And just for fun, I decided to put the little asterisk area that Nikon put in their brochure for shooting 9 frames a second with a Z7. There's a lot of excuses in there, if you ask me, and a lot of things that you have to compromise in order to get that. So again, 5.5 frames per second camera, in my opinion. The buffer is the other problem. The Z7 only gets 23 shots in 12-bit, and the Z6 only gets 36 in 12-bit. Now, 36 isn't bad, but I want you to compare that to the D850. The The D850 at 7 frames a second gets 84 shots in 12-bit, and at 9 frames a second gets between 44 and 48. So honestly, that's a pretty big discrepancy, especially when you're looking at a Z7 that costs $100 more than a D850. Now, if you go to 14-bit, the Z7 gets 16 to 18 shots in the buffer from the tests and hands-on reviews I've seen, and the D850 gets 37 at 8 frames a second. So I'm just, I'm a little bit unimpressed here, to be honest with you. Battery life. It's rated for 330 shots. The battery is. It's probably good for more than that. Dpreview says they were getting 1600. One thing to consider with battery life, though, if you're coming from a DSLR like I am, you are going to make a sacrifice in battery life no matter what. You're just not going to get the same battery life that you got with your DSLR. So, you know, if you're trying to compare, should I keep my DSLR versus go to the mirrorless camera has to have enough benefits that it justifies changing those batteries all the time. So final thoughts. So I think this is kind of a no-brainer for landscape shooters. If I was shooting landscapes, yeah, I'd definitely be on this. I wouldn't be real concerned about, you know, precision AF and stuff. You know, I can adjust that kind of stuff out in the field. So that's not bothering me. Buffer's not bothering me. Nothing like that for landscape. I think it would be awesome for macro shooters, for most macro work, same reasons. But for wildlife and action, I'm not so sure. In my mind, gear has to add value and do something that I can't do right now. So it's hard for me to justify a $3,400 camera that basically can't even do what my D7500 can in a lot of cases, and we're going to talk about that in a second. You're going to laugh. On the whole, the camera has to help me capture things I just can't do, and I'm not seeing that with these mirrorless cameras, especially based on the information I have at hand. Now, when the firmware is finalized and the production models are out, maybe I'll be singing a different tune. As a matter of fact, I hope I'm wrong about this, but I'm just, you know, putting it out there. As far as benefits to this camera, I think AF coverage is probably number one. It's followed by the electronic viewfinder and all it can do. So that's what I'm excited about, but I don't know that it outweighs the problems here. So my top 3 criteria for a wildlife camera, you're going to laugh: AF performance, frame rate, and buffer. And I'm talking about the no compromise frame rate here, not the, you know, made up stuff that, you know, we have to make all these sacrifices for. And so do the benefits outweigh the shortcomings? For wildlife, I don't think so. There's too many unknowns about the AF performance. There's too many unknowns about the new AF areas. The buffer is on the small side, especially with 14-bit files. The no compromise frame rate of 5.5 frames per second is a little bit slow. We've talked about all this. For performance, the D7500 is actually a better pick, and I could prove it to you. It has 8 real frames per second, okay? It has a known reliable autofocus system. It has a 50-shot buffer. It's a DX camera, but it has the same sensor as a D500, so it's no slouch. And it's about half the price of the Z6 and less than a third of the price of the Z7. And I kid you not, if they were sitting side by side, and my only choice was a Z6 or a Z7 and a D7500, and I knew I was going to go out and shoot a once-in-a-lifetime photo, I needed the camera to get it, I would absolutely pick the D7500 over these two based on what I know right now. So just to put this into perspective for you. So my final slide here: for less money, I'd rather have a D850 over the Z7 for wildlife work every day. And for the same money, I'd rather have a D500 over a Z6. If you're going to spend that kind of money, if you're going to spend $2,000 or $3,400, depending on which camera you're looking at, you need to get more benefits from that camera than what you were going to receive from the DSLRs. And I'm not seeing it for wildlife work. Now, for other work, like I say, landscape photographer, it's a no-brainer. But for my wildlife work, right now I'm sticking with my DSLRs. I know a lot of people are going to wonder, hey, is he going to do a full review on this mirrorless camera? At this point, I do not have one pre-ordered, and I know that I will. The thing is, I have to pay for all the cameras that I review. Nikon gives me absolutely nothing. So I have to actually spend my own money on this. And it's very hard for me to justify a $3,400 camera that has less performance than my $1,000 or so D7500. So that's kind of where I am. So right now, I'm not sure if I'm going to be doing a review or not. So anyhow, that about wraps it up. By the way, if you enjoyed this video, please go ahead and check out my website. I think you'll find a lot of stuff you like over there as well. Make sure you check out my ebook, Secrets to Stunning Wildlife Photography and Secrets to the Nikon Autofocus System. And if you happen to be watching this in like December or January, we're hoping to have the exposure book out by then, so check that out as well. Thanks so much for watching, and hope this helped. Have a great day.